The world remained oblivious on the night of April 25, 1986. It was a night like any other, with the stars twinkling in the sky and the gentle hum of life continuing as usual. In the town of Pripyat, Ukraine, life moved at its usual pace. The streets were filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation as people went about their daily routines. Families strolled through the park, unaware of the ticking clock just miles away. Children played on swings and slides, their carefree laughter echoing through the air. At the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, workers prepared for a routine safety test on Reactor 4. It was a task they had performed many times before, a procedure that had become almost second nature. This seemingly ordinary night was about to become anything but. The calm exterior of the plant belied the storm that was brewing within. It would forever be etched in history as the night of the world's worst nuclear disaster. A night that would change the course of countless lives and leave an indelible mark on the world. The Chernobyl Power Plant, a symbol of Soviet progress, stood as a testament to human ambition. It was a marvel of engineering, a beacon of technological advancement. It promised to illuminate homes and power industries. The plant was a source of pride, a shining example of what human ingenuity could achieve. However, beneath the surface, a dangerous combination of design flaws and human error brewed. The reactor's design, though innovative, was fraught with potential hazards. The reactor core, a volatile assembly of uranium and graphite, held the potential for unimaginable destruction. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant vigilance and precision. Unbeknownst to the world, the stage was set for an unprecedented catastrophe. The elements of disaster were all in place, waiting for the slightest misstep to trigger a chain reaction. The test plan for that night aimed to assess the reactor's safety systems. It was a routine procedure, a necessary step to ensure the plant's continued operation. It was a routine procedure, or so everyone believed. The workers went about their tasks with practiced ease, confident in their knowledge and experience. However, a fatal flaw in the reactor's design, coupled with a series of misjudgments and violations of safety protocols, would prove disastrous. The safeguards that were supposed to protect against such an event were inadequate. The reactor, inherently unstable at low power, became increasingly difficult to control. The operators, despite their training, found themselves in a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of control. As the operators struggled to manage the unpredictable chain reaction, they unknowingly pushed the reactor to its breaking point. The tension in the control room was palpable, as the situation grew more dire by the minute. The tension mounted in the control room as the night wore on. Faces grew more concerned, voices more urgent, as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Indicators blinked erratically, painting a confusing and alarming picture. The control panels, once a source of reassurance, now seemed to mock their efforts. The operators, unaware of the true gravity of the situation, continued with the test. They followed the procedures, trusting in the systems that had always worked before. They remained confident in the plant's safety features, failing to recognize the imminent danger lurking within the reactor core. Their training had not prepared them for this, an event that defied all expectations. The world outside remained blissfully ignorant, its fate hanging precariously in the balance. The people of Pripyat slept soundly, unaware that their lives were about to be irrevocably changed. At 1:23 a.m. the unthinkable happened. The night was still, the air thick with an eerie calm, when suddenly, a catastrophic event shattered the silence. A sudden surge of power ripped through Reactor 4. The control room, filled with the hum of machinery, was suddenly alive with alarms and flashing lights. The reactor core, overwhelmed by the uncontrolled chain reaction, ruptured. The immense pressure and heat caused the core to explode, sending a shockwave through the facility. A blinding flash lit up the night sky, followed by a deafening roar that shook the ground for miles. The explosion was so powerful that it was felt in nearby towns, waking residents from their sleep. The concrete and steel containment structure meant to contain a nuclear disaster failed to withstand the immense force. The explosion tore through the barriers, releasing a deadly mix of radioactive materials. A plume of radioactive material shot into the atmosphere, carrying with it the invisible specter of death. The cloud, filled with deadly isotopes, began to drift with the wind, spreading contamination far and wide. The explosion sent shockwaves through the power plant and beyond. Buildings crumbled, windows shattered, and the very ground seemed to tremble under the force of the blast. Debris rained down on the surrounding buildings, setting fires and plunging the facility into chaos. The The once orderly plant was now a scene of utter devastation, with flames licking at the ruins. Inside the control room, disbelief and confusion reigned as operators struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the disaster. The instruments they relied on were now useless, and the reality of the situation began to sink in. The reactor, now a mangled ruin, spewed deadly radiation into the environment. The invisible killer, radiation, began its relentless spread, seeping into the air, water, and soil. The invisible killer began its silent spread, contaminating everything it touched. Trees, animals, and even the very air became carriers of the deadly radiation. The immediate aftermath was a scene of unimaginable horror. The once bustling power plant was now a wasteland, filled with the sounds of crackling flames and the cries of the injured. First responders, firefighters and plant workers rushed to the scene, unaware of the invisible danger they faced. Their training had not prepared them for the scale of the disaster that awaited them. They battled the flames and tended to the injured, their bravery a testament to human courage in the face of unimaginable adversity. Each moment they spent in the radioactive environment brought them closer to a grim fate. However, their heroic efforts came at a terrible cost. The radiation, invisible and insidious, began to take its toll on their bodies. Many received lethal doses of radiation, their bodies forever scarred by the invisible enemy. The effects of the exposure were swift and brutal, leaving them with severe burns and radiation sickness. News of the disaster spread slowly at first, hampered by Soviet secrecy. The government, fearing the repercussions, tried to keep the incident under wraps. The authorities, fearing widespread panic, initially downplayed the severity of the incident. Official statements were vague, and the true scale of the disaster was hidden from the public. However, the truth soon became impossible to contain. Reports from nearby countries began to surface, and the extent of the radiation spread could no longer be denied. The invisible cloud of radiation, carried by the wind, began to trigger alarms across Europe. Countries far from the epicenter detected elevated radiation levels, raising international concern. The world watched in horror as the true extent of the Chernobyl disaster slowly came into focus. The global community realized that the effects of the explosion would be felt for generations to come, a stark reminder of the dangers of nuclear power. The firefighters who arrived at Chernobyl in those first desperate hours were ill-equipped for the invisible enemy they faced. They had no idea of the magnitude of the disaster that awaited them. The reactor had exploded, releasing a cloud of radioactive particles into the atmosphere, and these brave men were the first line of defense against an unprecedented catastrophe. Their standard-issue uniforms offered no protection against the invisible onslaught of radiation. These uniforms, designed for conventional fires, were utterly inadequate against the radioactive contamination that permeated the air. The firefighters were essentially walking into a death trap, armed with nothing but their courage and a sense of duty. Yet, with courage and determination, they fought the inferno, unaware that they were waging a losing battle against an unseen foe. The flames were not just ordinary flames, they were fueled by the radioactive materials from the reactor core. Every breath they took, every moment they spent near the reactor, was a step closer to their own demise. Many paid the ultimate price for their heroism, their sacrifice a stark reminder of the invisible dangers of radiation. These men who had rushed in to save others became victims themselves. Their names are now etched in memorials, a somber tribute to their bravery and the high cost of their sacrifice. Among the first responders were the liquidators, ordinary citizens conscripted into service to contain the disaster. These individuals came from all walks of life: soldiers, miners, engineers, and even volunteers. They were hastily trained and sent into the most dangerous areas to perform critical tasks. They were tasked with the dangerous and gruesome work of cleaning up the radioactive debris. This involved removing highly contaminated materials, constructing barriers to contain the radiation, and decontaminating the surrounding areas. The work was perilous, and the protective gear they wore was often insufficient. These unsung heroes, many of whom were exposed to high levels of radiation, worked tirelessly to mitigate the disaster's impact. Their efforts were crucial in preventing the spread of radioactive contamination to other regions. Despite the risks, they continued their work, driven by a sense of duty and the need to protect their fellow citizens. Their efforts, often overlooked, played a crucial role in preventing further contamination and saving countless lives. Without their intervention, the disaster could have had far more devastating consequences. The liquidators' bravery and dedication are a testament to the human spirit's resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity. As the world watched in horror, Soviet authorities began the daunting task of evacuating the nearby city of Pripyat. The decision to evacuate came too late for many, as the residents had already been exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. The authorities faced the enormous challenge of moving an entire city within a short period. Home to nearly 50,000 people, Pripyat was once a model Soviet city, a symbol of progress and prosperity. It was a vibrant community with schools, hospitals, and recreational facilities. The residents had no warning of the impending disaster, and their lives were turned upside down in an instant. Now it stood as a ghost town, its streets eerily deserted, its buildings abandoned in haste. The once bustling city was now silent, a haunting reminder of the disaster. Personal belongings were left behind, and the city became a time capsule of that fateful day. The evacuation, a logistical nightmare, unfolded over 36 hours, forever changing the lives of its residents. Families were separated, and many were forced to leave behind everything they owned. The sense of urgency and chaos was palpable as buses filled with frightened residents made their way out of the city. The evacuation of Pripyat stands as a testament to the human cost of the disaster. The emotional toll on the residents was immense, as they were uprooted from their homes and thrust into an uncertain future. The trauma of that day would linger for years to come. Residents, forced to leave their homes and possessions behind, could only watch as their city became a ghost town. The sense of loss was profound as they left behind not just their belongings, but their memories and their way of life. The trauma of that day, the uncertainty and fear, left an indelible mark on their lives. Many struggled to rebuild their lives in new locations, haunted by the memories of what they had lost. The psychological impact of the evacuation was as devastating as the physical effects of the radiation. Many lost loved ones to the delayed effects of radiation poisoning, the invisible killer claiming its victims long after the initial explosion. The long-term health consequences of the disaster continue to affect survivors and their families. The legacy of Chernobyl is a stark reminder of the dangers of nuclear power and the need for vigilance and safety in its use.